Hi, I'm Norm Abram. Welcome to the new Yankee Workshop. Now, if I was to tell you that you could take crummy old white pine planks like these and turn them into a table like this, would you consider building this project? Well, I hope so, because I got all the details next, right here in the new Yankee Workshop.
The new Yankee Workshop features the craftsmanship of Norm Abram.
What you're looking at is a barn that was built in 1860, and it's the oldest structure here at the Myacamas Vineyard. It needs a new roof, the sills are rotted, the siding is falling off. But if it was mine, I would leave it alone. It's the prized possession of Bob and Noni Trevors, who make the wine here. They also collect beautiful pine antiques, and I wanted to show you this table. It's over 10 feet long, and the top is made from recycled planks. There's been no effort to fix all the defects. Some of the nails still show. Some of the bigger holes have been filled in, but some of the flaws have been just left alone. Look at the end of the table. The planks are joined together with a spline, and it shows through. It just adds some nice character. But what I really like about this table are the proportions. It's just the right height. There's plenty of room for my legs to fit under the rail, and it'll easily sit 10 of my thirstiest friends. We're gonna have to build one of these back at the new Yankee Workshop. Another one of those nasty cut nails. Well, I gotta tell you, finding the antique lumber and then removing all the bits of iron takes longer than actually doing the woodworking project itself. Now, when I went up to my antique wood supplier, I asked him for some pine planks, and this is what he showed me. I said, "You've got to be joking. This will never turn into anything that looks decent." He said, "Be patient, clean it up, you'll be surprised." And look at the result. Here's our table, pretty much like the one you saw in the Napa Valley, the same dimensions. The top of the table I made up of 3 white pine planks. They did clean up beautifully, and I left the little nail holes behind and any other small defects to add some character to the piece. The base of the table is made from hard pine, the legs and the rails that join the legs together. Now, the hard pine came from some old beams that usually come out of barns or old warehouses. And look at this wood. Look at how tight the growth rings are to one another. This was a very slow-growing tree. And if you take the time to cut stock out of beams like this, the result is lumber that is just absolutely beautiful. Very straight grain and very close together. A nice, stable piece of wood. And even though it's over 100 years old, you can still smell the sap. Now, if you'd like to build the long table, a measured drawing is available with the materials list, and you'll hear more about that before the program ends. Now, I want to get started today by cutting the best 10-foot section out of each plank. But before we use any power tools, I want to take a moment to talk about shop safety. Be sure to read, understand, and follow all the safety rules that come with your power tools. Knowing how to use your power tools properly will greatly reduce the risk of personal injury. And remember this, there is no more important safety rule than to wear these safety glasses. That's good. Now, I still have a fair amount of nail removal to do in these planks, but let's go on to the hard pine. Now, here's a chunk of beam that I've actually removed all the nails from, and the objective is to turn it into a couple blanks for the legs. I'm going to use my resaw, which is just a large band saw with a very wide blade, coarse teeth with carbide tips. The first pass is just to take off a bit of the skin. Well, now I want to trim off a little bit along this edge, which is the sapwood, and a little along this edge, which is actually the heartwood, leaving the tightest grain section for my blank. What I've just done is made a few passes through the joiner to get one face of the blank flat. That's the first step in squaring up the blank. If I place the jointed edge against the fence and run the adjacent side through, I'll have one square corner. Now I'll turn to the surface planer. I'll place the jointed edge on the table, and as the piece passes through the planer, both the top and bottom edge will become parallel. For the last few minutes, I've been taking the blank and rounding it over, simply using my gouge. Now, the next thing I want to do is some layout. I have a gauge stick here, which actually duplicates the first leg that I turned. And there are critical intersections that I want to mark. Once I get them marked, I'll use my parting tool and some calipers to check the diameter. Well, a few minutes with some 150 grit sandpaper, doing the final sanding to smooth out all of the turning. After this, 2 more legs to go. The rails of the table are connected to the legs with a mortise and tenon joint. I'm starting to form the mortises in the legs here by using a 1-inch flat bottom bit called a Forstner bit, set to cut to a depth of 1.5 inches. Now I could finish up each mortise with a good sharp chisel, but since there are so many, I made a template out of 1/4-inch plywood with a hole in it that's a little bit larger than the finished mortise. To complete the mortise, I'm going to use my router, which is equipped with a collar and a straight cutting bit. The collar will ride on the inside of the cutout, and the bit will do the rest of the work. I milled the rails for the table from another length of hard pine beam, using the same procedures that I used to make the blanks for the legs. Now, on each end, I have to cut a tenon, and this lumber is relatively heavy, and it's a very long piece, so it would be difficult at the table saw using just the miter gauge to guide it through. So here I'm going to keep the stock stationary and use my radial arm saw, which is set up with a stacked dado head cutter, And I've put a stop block up against the fence to limit the length of the tenon. If I make passes from each side, I'll have a centered tenon 1 inch thick. Now, I've just made an adjustment to the radial arm, raising the blade so that I can complete the cut at the bottom of the tenon. That's good right there. And now one final adjustment and a test to cut the top of the tenon. Okay, that's good, 3/4 of an inch. Here I'm starting to form an open mortise, and that'll receive a cross piece at the center of the table. Now, I will leave the back corner of the mortise round, but I'm going to clean up this open side. Now, one more finishing touch to the tenons. A little saw cut at the shoulder, and while I have the sharp chisel out, I'm just going to round off each corner so that it'll properly fit into that mortise I made in each leg. And finally, I'm just going to chamfer the bottom edge of each rail with my block plane, because that's where your legs are going to slide under the table. And after I finish that, I'll sand each piece smooth, and first thing tomorrow morning, we'll assemble the base. Oh, good morning. Come on over here to the drill press, and I'll show you what I got started doing this morning. In order to attach the top to the base, I'm going to need some holes for some screws. So I've drilled at several locations on each rail. First, a 3/8 inch diameter counterbore, 3/4 of an inch deep for the head of the screw. Then I drilled a through hole, 3/16 of an inch in diameter all the way through. And the final and most important hole is this one, a 1 inch diameter counterbore, 1 inch deep. And what that'll allow is the screw to move back and forth as the top expands and contracts. Well, before we can assemble the table, there's one more piece I have to make, and I want to show it to you over here on the prototype. At the center of the table, there's one cross rail. It adds support to the top, and it gives me a place to attach the top right at the center. Here's the piece of stock that I'm using, and I've already rabbited out each end so that it'll fit into the mortise that I made in the long rails yesterday. The last thing that I have to do is round over the corners so that it'll fit in that mortise properly. And to do that, I'm going to use my sanding center. That's going to be fine. Now we'll begin the assembly of the table by building the two short ends. I'm just applying glue to both the mortise and the tenon, and we'll slip them together and clamp them in place. Now we'll start the main assembly by installing the center rail first. And to secure it, along with the glue, a couple of screws. Now let's see how this goes together. Okay, now we'll put a clamp on it, and this is where the center brace comes in handy. Since this base is almost 9 feet long, I can use shorter clamps up against the center brace. Now this other clamp will help to pull the bottom of the mortise tight on the leg. This over and under technique works pretty well. Well, now for the top. I'm taking each one of the planks and ripping a little bit off each edge. I want to get the maximum amount that I can out of each piece. Now, it did take some time to remove the nails, about 2.5 hours. Let me show you the pile that I ended up with. Quite a few, but well worth taking the time to remove them because only one will ruin a saw blade. Well, I hate to do this, but a 16.5-inch plank just will not go through a 12-inch planer. So what I'm going to have to do is rip this in half. And after I've surface planed it, when I assemble the top, I'll bring the same 2 edges back together. Maybe you won't even see the joint. Well, for the last few minutes, I've been working on the edges of all the planks for the top. I'm making them square and straight using my handheld power plane. Now, it's a little difficult to use the joiner with boards this long if you're working alone. It takes a little longer with the power plane, but it does a fine job. Now, you'll notice that I'm using a double row of biscuits every 1 foot on center. All right, with glue on all the surfaces, let's see if we can get these pieces to go together. This is when I wish I had a few extra hands around. That's great. Now at each intersection of a rail and a leg, I'm putting in this 1/2-inch peg. And that will not only add some strength to the joint, but it's a nice decorative touch. Well, that cuts it to length. Now I'll just belt sand the edges. Well, now it's just a matter of sanding the whole top smooth with my random orbit sander. I'm starting out with 100 grit, and then I'll go to 120 because this pine is so soft. Now some 3 3/4-inch screws in the holes that I pre-drilled earlier will secure the top. Now, inevitably, you will find some defects in the top that you don't want to just let go, like this one right here. I don't want anyone to get any splinters. So what we're going to do is make a Dutchman, or fill it in. Now, in the old days, you could chisel it all out and make a piece to fit. Today, I use a template, which I made out of hardboard, sort of a rectangular shape. It's not perfectly square, it's a little irregular. Put some double stick tape on it, so that when I set it on the tabletop, it'll just stick in position. Now, to plow out the bad material, I'm going to use my router, which is equipped with a special collar and a little spiral bit. All right, with that all cleaned out, I can just remove the template and place it on a piece of scrap stock that's the same material I used to make the top. Then I remove the brass bushing from the collar, and that'll allow me to cut a patch that'll fit the mortise perfectly. Now, to remove the patch, I first remove the template, and then I'll rip the board to get the patch out. Now, to complete the removal of the patch, I'm just going to use my mat knife to just cut through the last bit of material. Okay, let's see how that's going to fit. All right, well now, because the corners of the mortise are just a little bit round, I'm going to take a piece of sandpaper and round each corner of the patch. Okay, now I'll just sand it flush. Well, maybe one more patch and a little bit of final sanding, and this table will be ready for some finish. Now, to protect the wood of our long table, it's really a two-step process. On the heart pine turnings and the rails of the table, as well as the underside of the top and the top itself, I put several coats of tung oil and let those dry thoroughly. But then there's a second step, which is actually to give it a little bit of luster. I applied a paste wax, just simply laid it on the top of the table, and now I'm just going to buff it with my buffer. Now, we certainly expect that over the years, because this is such a soft wood on the tabletop, that it will receive a lot of abuse, nicks and dings. But that's what we want, and we expect that as it ages, it'll start to look more beautiful. Well, that turned out great. Now I think it's time to call 10 or 12 of my closest friends and invite them over for a banquet. Come to think of it, maybe I better check with the wife first.